All right, welcome back to the All Sorts podcast. Today we're diving deep, really deep, into a moment in history, a moment that echoes with the sheer weight of the past.
You got it. We're talking about the first major German city to fall to the Allies in World War II.
Aachen, 1944.
Yeah, the Battle of Aachen.
So this isn't just another battle story. We're going to try to unpack why this particular clash, often kind of overshadowed by the bigger, more famous campaigns.
Right.
Why this one was so pivotal. And to do that, we've got an awesome spread of sources to pull from. We've got the detailed breakdown from, of course, Wikipedia, always a good starting point.
Right.
We've got some really sharp analysis from History Hit and WWII History.
Very good sources.
And then a super focused case study from the Modern War Institute.
Nice.
And for that human element, we're tapping into some firsthand accounts from veterans' legacies.
Excellent.
So we're looking at everything from the grand strategy, the big picture, all the way down to the gritty, boots on the ground experience. And our mission, if you will, listener, is to take all of this and kind of boil it down for you so you can really quickly grasp the complexity of this battle and, its significance.
Its importance, yeah.
Without getting bogged down in a ton of minutia.
Yeah, that's always the challenge, right? Finding those real key insights.
Yeah, those aha moments like, oh, wow, that's why this mattered so much.
Right. And to really set the stage here, we need to pull back a bit and look at the big picture, the strategic situation in the fall of 1944. The Allies, after liberating Paris, they're pushing east towards the Rhine River, the heart of Germany. But standing in their way is this massive obstacle, the Siegfried Line.
Ah, the Siegfried Line, or as the Germans called it, the West Wall.
Exactly.
Okay.
This wasn't just some line on a map. I mean, in some places, this thing stretched 10 miles deep.
10 miles.
Yeah, it was a network of fortifications, trenches, bunkers, you name it.
Yeah.
A real defensive nightmare.
And it was after Operation Market Garden, that really ambitious airborne operation.
All right, remember Market Garden trying to outflank the Siegfried Line?
Yeah, which, didn't quite go as planned.
No, it didn't.
It stalled. And that gave the Germans this breathing room to really dig in, reinforce the West Wall.
Exactly.
Their supply lines were stretched thin, so it gave the Germans this crucial window.
Now, Aachen itself, it wasn't some industrial powerhouse or a major transportation hub.
Right.
But it had this immense symbolic value.
Yeah, you can't underestimate that psychological impact. This was the first major German city that was really threatened with capture.
Exactly. And often it was the historic capital of Charlemagne.
Oh, Charlemagne.
Yeah, the guy who the Nazis, they kind of held up as this, founder of the First Reich.
Right. So a lot of propaganda value there.
Absolutely. And this symbolic weight, it really colored the entire battle. I mean, for the first time, the local German population, they were seeing their own soldiers fighting on German soil, defending their homes.
Yeah, there's a quote from a German officer. He noticed this shift in how they were perceived. It wasn't just Nazis anymore. They were German soldiers fighting for Germany.
And that really changes the dynamic.
Definitely. So let's talk about the forces involved here.
Yeah. So on the German side, you've got General Friedrich Kuchling's LXXXI. Initially, they had the 116th Panzer Division, but they got pulled out.
Okay.
So he's left with, the 183rd and 246th Volksgrenadier Divisions. These are a bit of a mixed bag,
Yeah, the Volksgrenadier divisions, by this point in the war, quality of German infantry divisions had taken a hit, right?
Absolutely. The Volksgrenadier were a mix of veterans, new recruits, conscripts, transfers from other units.
A lot of them lacking experience.
Right, and not as well equipped as the earlier infantry division.
But still dangerous.
Oh, yeah. They had some newer small arms.
Okay.
But they lacked the artillery, the motorized transport of those crack earlier divisions. And some of the units defending Aachen, they were really green.
Newly formed, barely trained.
Yeah, but what they did have going for them was the Siegfried Line itself.
Ah, yes, those fortifications. It must have been a nightmare for the attackers.
It was. You're talking interconnected pillboxes, forts, bunkers, minefields, those dragon's teeth, anti-tank obstacles. Oh, yeah, and tons of barbed wire.
Layers upon layers of defenses.
And the Germans, they'd learned from the Eastern Front. They were running their main line of resistance right through the towns themselves.
So basically turning every building into a potential strong point.
Pretty much.
Okay, so on the American side, the main force was General Corlitt's S9X Corps.
Right, with the 30th Infantry Division leading the charge from the north.
supported by the 743rd Tank Battalion.
That's right. They had that independent tank battalion attached to the infantry, plus the 2nd Armored Division and the 29th Infantry Division on their flank.
And to the south.
You had General Collins' 7th Corps, with the 1st Infantry Division leading the way.
Okay.
And they had the 9th Infantry and the 3rd Armored Division backing them up.
So these guys, they'd had some time to rest and refit.
They had, which was crucial because, they'd been fighting pretty hard.
But there were still some challenges, especially with the replacement system.
Yeah, that was a bit of an issue. The focus was on getting those numbers back up, sometimes at the expense of, proper training.
Mm-hmm. Right, so you had some pretty green replacements coming in.
Yeah, some of those junior officers, they were lacking experience.
Wow.
And some of the tankers, they were arriving in Europe with barely any time behind the controls of a tank.
You're kidding!
Seriously. They had to learn on the job, basically.
And that meant higher casualties among these new guys who were, well, not fully prepared for the horrors of combat.
Absolutely.
Now, the initial Allied plan was to go for a pincer movement.
Right. Try to encircle Aachen, avoid a direct assault through the city itself.
Sorry.
They didn't want to get bogged down in street fighting if they could help it.
And they had near total air superiority.
Oh, yeah, that was a huge advantage. In fact, the 1st Infantry Division, they actually managed to punch through some of those lighter German defenses as early as September 12th.
Really?
Yeah. And before the main ground offensive kicked off on October 2nd, they hit the German positions with 6 days of heavy artillery bombardment.
6 days? I mean, that must have been just relentless.
Oh, it was. But you know what? Despite all that firepower, it didn't really do that much damage to those pillboxes and bunkers.
Really?
Yeah, they were just too well built. It did disrupt German movements during the day, made it hard to resupply and reinforce.
Okay.
But those fortifications, they held up pretty well. And then on October 2nd, they had the opening aerial bombardment, 450 aircraft in the first wave.
Wow, that's a lot of firepower.
It was. But they didn't score any direct hits on the pillboxes.
Seriously?
Yeah, the smoke from the artillery barrage, it kind of obscured the targets.
Mm-hmm.
So despite all the bombs and shells, the Germans were still dug in, ready to fight.
So the stage is set for a really tough battle.
Oh, it was going to be brutal.
So October 2nd, the 30th Infantry Division launches their attack from the north. What happens?
Well, they hit those German defenses, and they were immediately met with fierce resistance. I mean, even with their artillery pounding those pillboxes, it took an average of 30 minutes to capture just one.
30 minutes?
Yeah, and the Germans, they were quick to counterattack if the Americans let up the pressure at all. Some companies suffered huge losses in a very short amount of time.
I can only imagine.
It was brutal. Forcing river crossings, using flamethrowers against those bunkers.
Desperate stuff.
Yeah, and by the afternoon, some elements of the 30th, they'd pushed through those outer defenses, and they reached Pallenberg.
Okay.
But that's where things got even worse. House-to-house fighting.
Oh, that's always nasty.
It is. Hand grenade duels in the streets. And it was there that Private Harold G. Kimmer, he threw himself on a grenade to save his buddies.
Wow.
He was awarded the Medal of Honor posthumously.
Incredible bravery.
And then you had the fighting around Rimberg. The Germans had turned this old medieval castle into a strong point.
Oh, wow.
The American armor, they couldn't even cross the river there to support the infantry. So the infantry had to attack this heavily fortified position pretty much on their own.
That's almost suicidal.
It was incredibly difficult. But, despite all of that, the 30th Division, they managed to knock out something like 50 pillboxes on that first day.
50?
Yeah, often by maneuvering around them, hitting them from the rear.
Okay.
The 29th Infantry Division, they were launching these diversionary attacks on the flank, which helped to draw some of the German attention away.
Okay, so they're making some progress, but it's incredibly slow and costly.
Absolutely. And the Germans, they weren't giving up. That night, they launched a counterattack with the 902nd Assault Gun Battalion.
So they're throwing everything they've got at them.
They were, but luckily the Allied artillery, it really disrupted the attack. And the next day, the American armor was able to move up, but it was still slow going because of those constant German counterattacks. They did eventually take Rimberg, but they had to blast those pillboxes at point-blank range with Sherman tanks and those M12 gun motor carriages.
Those are like self-propelled artillery, right?
Yeah, big guns on a tank chassis. And then there was U-Bock. Really intense fighting there. American tanks got pinned down. They barely escaped getting overrun by a German counterattack. The 30th Infantry Division was taking heavy casualties.
Just brutal, brutal fighting.
It was. And even when the Germans failed to retake territory, those counterattacks, they really slowed the American advance down.
Tie them up.
Yeah, they couldn't push forward as quickly as they wanted to.
So what happens next?
Well, on October 4th, the American advance was really limited. They took 2 small towns, Hoverdor and Beggendorf, but they took heavy losses.
For very little gain.
Yeah, and then on October 5th, things picked up a bit. The 119th Regiment captured Merstein-Herbach. But the Germans were still counterattacking, throwing in their tanks, even some aircraft.
They were getting desperate.
They were running low on reserves.
Okay.
They did send a detachment of Tiger tanks to Alsdorf.
Ah, the Tigers, the big German heavy tanks.
Yeah, they were formidable opponents, but even they couldn't turn the tide.
So what about that big counterattack on October 8th?
Yeah, that was a real desperate gamble by the Germans. They threw together this force of, whatever they could scrape together. Infantry, assault troops, some guys from the 108th Panzer Brigade.
A real mixed bag.
They even had some salvaged armored vehicles.
Yeah.
And initially they had some success. They cut off an American platoon. They almost reached a key road junction.
Wow.
But then the American artillery opened up, and they got hit with counterattacks by Shermans and infantry in Alsdorf. They were forced to withdraw.
So it was a failure in the end.
It was. And it showed just how bad things were getting for the Germans in Aachen. They ended up transferring the 3rd Panzer Grenadier Division to the sector.
Panzer Grenadiers, those are mechanized infantry, right?
Yeah, heavily armed. And they also sent in elements of the ISS Panzer Corps.
Including the 1st SS Panzer Division.
Yeah, some of their best units.
Wow, so they were really reinforcing Aachen.
They were. They knew it was a critical point.
Okay, so while all this is going on in the north, what's happening with the 1st Infantry Division in the south?
They launched their offensive on October 8th. Their objectives were Verlautenheide and Hill 231.
Hill 231, that's the one that became known as Crucifix Hill, right?
Exactly, because of the large crucifix on top. They started their attack with a massive artillery barrage.
Really softening up the German defenses.
They were, and it worked. They were able to take both objectives relatively quickly.
Okay.
And there was some amazing heroism on Crucifix Hill. Captain Bobby E. Brown, he single-handedly knocked out 3 German pillboxes with pole charges.
Pole charges.
Yeah, those are basically explosive charges attached to long poles. You get close to the bunker and boom.
Wow, that takes some guts.
It does. And even after he was wounded, he kept leading his men. He got the Medal of Honor for his actions.
Amazing.
And by October 10th, the 1st Infantry Division, they'd reached their designated link-up position with the guys coming from the north.
Despite those German counterattacks.
Yeah, there was some heavy fighting, especially on Crucifix Hill. The Germans tried hard to retake it, but the Americans held on.
And then General Hübner issued that ultimatum to the Germans in Aachen, right?
He did.
Yeah.
On October 10th, he told them to surrender or face a massive bombardment.
And they refused.
They did. So the next day, the Americans unleashed everything they had on Aachen. Artillery, airstrikes, the whole works.
Must have been devastating.
It was. And with the pincers closing around the city, the Americans were now facing the really tough task of fighting their way in.
And their casualties were mounting.
They were. The Germans were getting smart. They were turning cellars into pillboxes. In Bardenburg, the Americans had to shell the town house by house just to clear it out.
And the counterattacks continued.
Oh, yeah. On October 12th, the Germans launched a big counterattack against the 30th Infantry Division, but the American artillery and anti-tank defenses broke it up.
And then there was that crazy tank battle near Burke.
Yeah, one American Sherman held off a whole group of German tanks for 3 hours.
3 hours? That's incredible.
Until reinforcements from the 2nd Armored Division showed up.
Talk about holding the line.
Yeah, that was some serious tenacity. And the 30th Infantry Division, they were ordered to keep pushing south, even though they were in defensive positions.
To tighten that noose around Aachen.
Exactly. They got reinforced by 2 battalions from the 29th Infantry Division. And the Germans, they kept hitting Crucifix Hill, trying to retake it.
But they failed.
They did. The air bombardment of Aachen, that went on from the 11th to the 13th, and then the 26th Infantry Regiment, they were given the task of clearing out an industrial zone on the 14th, getting ready for the assault into the city center.
So the stage is set for the final push into Aachen itself.
It is. But the Germans, they were still trying to break out of that encirclement.
They weren't giving up.
On October 15th, they launched another big counterattack, this time aimed at the 1st Infantry Division.
trying to create a gap in the American lines.
Yeah, to relieve the pressure on Aachen. Some of their heavier tanks actually broke through, but the main attack was smashed by American artillery and airstrikes.
A lot of close air support in this battle.
Oh yeah, the American air power was a huge factor. And the 3rd Panzer Grenadier Division, they kept launching these small-scale counterattacks on the 16th. But they didn't get anywhere.
So they were still bottled up.
They were. And while all this was happening, the 30th Infantry Division, they kept pushing south towards Würselen.
With elements of the 29th and 2nd Armored Divisions?
That's right. But they were taking heavy artillery fire, and the Germans were using houses as bunkers for their tanks, so progress was slow.
Urban combat is always tough.
It is. But General Hobbs, he pulled off a smart flanking maneuver, and on October 16th, the 30th and 1st Infantry Divisions finally linked up.
They closed the trap.
They did. But the cost had been high on both sides.
So Aachen is surrounded, but now they have to fight their way in?
Right. And the 1st Infantry Division, they could only spare 1 regiment for the assault into the city itself.
1 regiment?
Yeah, the 26th Infantry. And they were under strength, only 2 battalions.
Wow, that's not a lot of men to take a whole city.
It wasn't. And they had limited tank and artillery support.
And they were facing, what, about 5,000 German defenders?
Roughly.
But
yeah.
weren't most of them, not regular army?
A lot of them were Navy, Air Force, even police personnel.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't have many tanks or assault guns.
Okay.
But they had the city itself on their side. Those narrow streets, the buildings, they could turn it into a real death trap.
Urban warfare is always brutal.
It is. And the Americans, they learned that the hard way. Their first attack into the city on October 13th, they got hit hard.
What happened?
The Germans were using the sewers, the cellars, to move around unseen, to pop up behind American lines. They had to clear every single building, every underground passage.
Talk about a nightmare.
It was. And the Shermans, they were just too big for those narrow streets. They were easy targets for German anti-tank guns.
So how did they make any progress at all?
Slowly. Very slowly. It was a matter of taking one house at a time. They even started using their 105mm howitzers at point-blank range to blast holes in walls.
To create passageways between buildings.
Yeah, to avoid going out in the streets.
Yeah.
And the Shermans, they were basically firing into every building before the infantry went in, just to try to suppress any German defenders.
Just spraying and praying, hoping to hit something.
Pretty much. And the Germans, they were using those sewers to sneak behind American lines. They were launching these small but fierce counterattacks. It was a real meat grinder.
And that's when they brought in Task Force Hogan, right?
Right. That was a battalion from the 33rd Armored Regiment, part of the 3rd Armored Division. They were sent in to hit the northern sector of the city, protect the 26th Infantry's flank, and take the Losberg Heights.
The high ground.
Yeah. They overlooked the German command posts at the Hotel Quellenhof, and they wanted to cut the Aachen-Lorenzburg Highway.
To isolate the defenders even more?
Exactly. So on October 18th, they get ready to assault the Hotel Quellenhof. They're hitting it with everything they've got.
And what happened?
The Germans reinforced the hotel with about 300 SS troops.
The SS, those were the elite.
They were. And they launched this massive counterattack that actually took the pressure off the Quellenhof for a while.
So they almost broke out?
They almost did. But in the end, 2 things really helped the Americans take the city.
What were they?
First, they started hitting the remaining German strong points with those big 155mm guns.
Just pounding them into dust.
Yeah, really softening them up. And then they brought in a fresh battalion from the 110th Infantry Regiment, part of the 28th Infantry Division.
To reinforce the 26th.
Right. So finally, on October 21st, after days of brutal street fighting, the 26th and 110th Infantry Regiments took the central district of Aachen.
And the Germans in the Hotel Quellenhof, they surrendered.
They did. Later that same day, the battle for Aachen was finally over.
But at a tremendous cost.
It was. The Americans, they lost over 7,000 men.
Killed, wounded, missing.
Yeah. And the Germans, they lost over 5,000 men, and another 5,600 were captured.
The 30th and 1st Infantry Divisions, they were hit especially hard.
They were. And the German army as a whole, they lost 2 entire divisions in Aachen, and 8 more were badly mauled. It really hurt their ability to fight.
Yeah, 2 entire divisions wiped out. That's a significant blow.
It was. And, the Germans, they came away from Aachen with a lot of respect for the American firepower and the American tanks.
They learned the hard way.
They did. And both the 30th and 1st Infantry Divisions, they got distinguished unit citations for their actions in Aachen.
Well deserved.
They were. But, that German defense, as tough as it was, it really messed up the Allied plans.
How so?
Well, they hoped for a quick advance into Germany, but Aachen held them up. So the First Army, They got tasked with capturing the dams behind the Hürtgen forest.
Which led to the Battle of Hürtgen Forest.
Exactly. Which turned out to be even worse than Aachen.
Really?
Yeah, much tougher fighting. But, despite all that, the capture of Aachen, it was a major turning point in the war.
It was the first major German city to fall to the Allies.
And it opened the way to the Ruhr, the industrial heartland of Germany, and the Rhine River. It was a big morale boost for the Americans, even though they knew there was still a lot of fighting ahead.
So, Aachen, a battle that often gets overlooked, but it was incredibly significant. It showed the symbolic importance of even a single city and the incredible tenacity of both the American and German soldiers.
Absolutely. It was a brutal, bloody affair, a real testament to the human cost of war.
Yeah, thousands of men killed on both sides just for one city.
It really makes you think about the sacrifices that were made.
It does. So, listener, what are the key takeaways here? Well, first, that symbolic importance of Aachen. It wasn't just a military objective, it represented something bigger.
Right, it was a blow to German morale, a boost to Allied morale.
And then there's the sheer difficulty of urban warfare, fighting street by street, house by house, against a determined enemy and well-prepared defenses.
It's incredibly tough, incredibly costly.
And finally, the perseverance of the American forces. They suffered heavy losses, but they kept fighting and they kept pushing forward.
And they achieved their objective.
They did. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many other battles throughout history, battles that maybe we don't hear much about, actually played a crucial role in shaping the course of events?
That's a good question to think about.
It is. And as we step back from this particular moment in history, we want to remind you to keep that curiosity alive, to keep exploring. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the Battle of Aachen, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the All Sorts podcast on YouTube.
That's right. We've got a whole archive of deep dives waiting for you, covering all sorts of fascinating topics.
And for those quick hits of knowledge and behind-the-scenes looks, be sure to follow us on X, Instagram, and Threads.
Your support means the world to us. It helps us keep bringing you these deep dives, these explorations into the past.
So until next time, keep those brains buzzing, keep asking questions, and keep seeking those aha moments.
And we'll see you in the next deep dive.